Welcome. In this explainer, we are doing a forensic deep dive into the concept of sabr, or steadfastness. And our entire analysis is grounded in one very specific teaching, the 42nd session of the Tafsir of Surah Ar-Ra'd. We're going to go way beyond just a simple definition of patience to really unpack the powerful, active, and multi-layered virtue that this text describes. So here's our roadmap. Our analysis is broken down into 6 parts, and we're following the logic of the source text exactly. We'll start with the foundation of sabr, what it's all about. Then we'll explore its different dimensions. From there, we'll look at how it applies in times of deception, examine some key prophetic examples, get into its nuances, and finally, we'll talk about the ultimate reward for practicing this virtue. Okay, let's begin right at the foundation. Before we can even start to analyze its different forms, the source material first has to establish what makes sabr theologically significant in the first place. What's the core condition that elevates simple human endurance into a virtue that's actually recognized by God? The source text really anchors its entire discussion right here, in this specific verse from Surah Ar-Ra'd. And you have to notice the structure. Sabr isn't just presented as some isolated characteristic. No, it's the leading quality. It's the very first in a chain of interconnected actions. First patience, then establishing prayer, then giving charity, and then actively pushing back against evil with good. So the verse frames sabr as the foundational mindset that makes all the other righteous acts possible. It's like the engine of a proactive, devout life that leads to that ultimate reward. So the single most crucial point here is motivation. The source immediately puts a laser focus on that phrase, seeking the countenance of their Lord. And it draws a really critical distinction. The only kind of patience that has any spiritual value is the one that is done purely for God. Any other kind of patience, to protect your reputation, or look strong in front of others, or even just out of pure stubbornness, well, that's considered theologically empty. It has to be an act of worship, plain and simple. All right, so now that we've established the why behind sabr, the source text starts to deconstruct the what. And it argues that perseverance isn't just one single concept. It's actually a progression, a moving through 3 distinct and escalating dimensions. We're about to see how this one simple word unfolds into a complete framework for steadfastness. And to kick off this deeper analysis, the source poses this exact question. By isolating these 3 specific terms from the Quran, it's signaling to us that we need to move beyond a generic, one-size-fits-all definition of patience and really dig into the specific nuances that each of these terms carries. Now, this is really interesting. This slide shows you the exact spot in the source document where this critical distinction begins. You can see the author laying the groundwork, getting ready to explain that even though these terms are all related to steadfastness, they apply in totally different contexts and represent increasing levels of commitment and action. So first up, we have the foundational level, sabr. This is the internal, personal struggle. The source defines this as patience in 3 key areas. Patience when you're carrying out God's commands, like forcing yourself to wake up for the dawn prayer when it's hard. Patience in staying away from what God has forbidden, like fighting the urge to gossip or act on your anger. And finally, patience when you're facing personal calamities like an illness or a loss. This is the individual's core spiritual resilience. Building right on top of that individual sabr, we get to musabara. The source explains this as taking the concept from the individual and expanding it to the whole community. It's about being steadfast together. And it isn't just about silently enduring next to each other, it's the active process of a community encouraging each other, strengthening one another to stay patient and resolute, especially when you're facing some kind of external opposition or social pressure. It transforms that internal state into a shared, reinforcing social strength. And finally, we get to the pinnacle of this whole framework, murabata. The source defines this as the most active and physical version of perseverance. Literally, it means being stationed at the frontiers, physically guarding the community's borders from external threats. It's a state of constant readiness, of active defense. Metaphorically, it also suggests guarding the intellectual and spiritual frontiers of the faith from ideological attacks, which represents the absolute highest commitment to protecting the group. So this 3-part breakdown naturally leads us to a really crucial clarification. The source directly takes on the common misunderstanding that sabr means being weak or just passively accepting injustice. The text argues that, especially when you're dealing with conflict and deception, sabr is the exact opposite of being passive. It's an active and powerful form of resistance. And to back this up, the source brings in this powerful verse from Surah Ali Imran. The command here is a sequence. First, persevere, ispiru. That's your individual sabr. Then endure against others, sabiru, that's the collective musabara. And finally, remain stationed, rabitu, and that's the active murabata. The source argues that God commands all three of these together as a complete active formula for success, which directly links your internal resolve to collective defensive action. And this just brilliantly illustrates the core nuance, doesn't it? The source explicitly states that in a defensive struggle, patience is not about suppressing your feelings towards an aggressor. It's coupled with ghayz, which is a righteous, controlled indignation against injustice. In this context, sabr means holding your ground, being firm in the struggle, and not wavering in the fight. It is steadfastness in action, not quiet tolerance of oppression. Now, to make these concepts really concrete, the source text gives us some powerful case studies from the lives of the prophets, which demonstrate how these different dimensions of sabr were actually applied. These aren't just stories, they're basically archetypes of steadfastness. The analysis really zooms in on the story of Prophet Abraham's command to sacrifice his son. The source presents this not just as an act of faith, but as the ultimate example of a very specific and very high category of sabr, patience in obedience to a direct and profoundly difficult divine command. The proof here is the Quranic dialogue itself. The absolute key is the son's response. See, he doesn't just passively agree. He actively frames his submission using the language of patience, saying, "You will find me of the steadfast," using that exact word, sabirin. This shows us that both father and son knew exactly what this unimaginable trial was, a test of their sabr in the face of an explicit command from God. Now, this comparison is absolutely critical to the source's argument. Prophet Jacob also showed profound patience, right? After his sons betrayed Joseph, he famously declared fasabrin jamin, a beautiful patience. But, and the source points this out, his patience was a reaction to a tragedy that happened to him. Abraham's patience, on the other hand, was an active response to a divine instruction he had to carry out himself. The commentary makes it crystal clear. Patience in actively fulfilling a difficult command is a higher and more tested station than patience in passively enduring a calamity. So, building on those prophetic case studies, the source text then formalizes the different contexts where sabr is needed. It moves from examples to a really clear categorization, showing us how steadfastness is required across the entire spectrum of our lives. And here they are. The source text formally classifies sabr into three domains. First, sabr ala ta'a, patience upon obedience, which Prophet Abraham perfectly exemplified. Second, sabr ala musiba, patience upon calamity, just like we saw with Prophet Jacob. And third, sabr an masiyah, patience from disobedience, which is that constant struggle to refrain from sin, exemplified by Prophet Joseph when he resisted temptation. So together, these three cover every challenge: doing good, avoiding evil, and enduring hardship. And for that third category, patience in the face of calamity, the source cites this verse as the definitive mindset you have to have. The statement, "Indeed we belong to Allah, and indeed to Him we will return," is not a statement of passive resignation. Not at all. It's an affirmation of divine sovereignty. It's a profound declaration that our lives, our health, our families, they're all a trust from God, not a permanent possession. This single statement reframes a personal tragedy within the ultimate reality, and that is the verbal embodiment of sabr. And that brings us to the final part of our analysis, the reward. After all this struggle, this active guarding of the self and the community, what's the divine response? Well, the source concludes by examining the specific and surprisingly immediate rewards promised to those who are steadfast. So this is a crucial point that the source makes. The reward isn't entirely delayed until the afterlife. While paradise is, of course, the ultimate goal, there is an immediate divine response in this life. For those who are patient, God sends down two things directly: salawat, which are special blessings and divine praise, and rahmah, His all-encompassing mercy. This is described as a tangible feeling of peace and support that comes down upon a person during the trial itself. And this final excerpt from the source text really underscores just how special this reward is. The text emphasizes that while God sends blessings or salawat upon believers in general, it is mentioned as a specific and direct reward for the sabirin, the patient ones. The source presents this not as just some generic blessing, but as a unique divine honor, a mark of a special relationship and an elevated status granted by God to those who persevere. So after going through this entire analysis, we can see how the source text meticulously reframes patience. It's no longer about just passive endurance or waiting for a storm to pass.
Instead, sabr emerges as this dynamic, active, and strategic force, a fundamental strength for guarding one's faith, protecting one's community, and mastering oneself.